The question is, who are the organizations that are going to thrive in this AI era and which are the organizations that are going to struggle? The groups of companies that are more vulnerable, there are other groups of companies that are more advantaged, but the ultimate outcome more than anything else will come down to strategy, mindset, capability. When you've got these big platform shifts and you've got this huge challenge of imagination and working out what this brand new technology can do, not just what it can do today, what it might be able to do tomorrow, and being able to envisage what the technology will be able to do and what problems that can be solved in turn. You need to be incredibly creative. You need to be incredibly imaginative. And so kind of a mindset of like, let's just wait and pause and kind of just take things slowly. Frankly, I don't think we have that option.
Hi, I'm Shannon Scott, Chief Product Officer at Airwallex, and today I'm joined by Paul Bassat, founder of SquarePeg, an early investor in Airwallex. Paul, welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about all things AI.
Looking forward to it.
As an investor, what I'm really interested to hear about from you is, what does a great AI company look like today?
Yeah. Look, I think the starting point is always the problem that you're solving. And if you think about, let's go back to that sort of origin story of Airwallex. Financial services historically had been about relationship managers and products and kind of selling products to folks. And software came along, global distribution of the internet, and suddenly you can replace products with software. And that's essentially what Airwallex has done. It has digitized products, and it means that these products can exist globally. They can be launched to millions and millions of customers at the same time. And so, in a sense, Airwallex couldn't have been built 10 years earlier because a lot of those elements weren't in place. And so the technology enabled the founding story of Airwallex. And so I think what we're seeing now is we're in this new era of AI and these remarkable, like incredible capabilities. And so then we sort of say, okay, what are the problems that can suddenly be solved with AI that were unsolvable before? And that class of problems that can be solved are incredibly broad problems. Now, in theory, those problems can be solved by startups. They can be solved by companies like Airwallex that are still high growth, super dynamic, but coming from an earlier era. In theory, they can be solved in all sorts of different ways. The question is who is best placed to solve them, and who are the organizations that are going to thrive in this AI era, and which are the organizations that are going to struggle.
I hear a lot about AI native companies. It's like, we're an AI company, we're AI first. Yeah. And there's a question mark. It's like, to what extent is the product entirely AI, and then its defensibility, its depth, versus a company that potentially could be AI assisted or sort of AI evolved. I'm curious how you look at that as an investor.
I think this debate between incumbents and disruptors is like the incredibly interesting debate. And so I'll give you sort of examples. If you go back to the internet era, so I founded Seek in 1997 as a sort of an internet era company. And effectively we said, people have been looking for jobs, a little bit, analogous, I guess, to the Airwallex story. People have been looking for jobs in the newspaper. You've had this huge market globally, but operating on a local basis, obviously. So you'd go to the Melbourne Age for jobs in Melbourne, you'd go to the New York Times for jobs in New York, etc. So it'd be these local markets operating all around the world where people go look for a job. Suddenly the internet comes along, and the internet's a better mousetrap for doing that. And the internet's a better mousetrap for doing lots of things, not just looking for jobs in our case. And the internet was a highly disruptive platform. So if you think about the advantages, for example, of a newspaper publisher, if you think about the examples of a travel agent, those advantages actually became disadvantages as the internet era came along. So distribution was a huge advantage of newspapers. Well, suddenly distribution is free and limitless. You can distribute your product on the internet to anyone in the world at essentially zero cost simultaneously. So suddenly all that legacy they had was a disadvantage. So internet era, by and large, was very bad for incumbents as a broad generalization. If you think about the mobile internet era, in the cloud computing era, and the move from kind of software sold as a product with, annual maintenance fees, the 19% or whatever a year, to software as a service business models, which again is only a 20-year-old phenomenon. If you think about a great company like Atlassian, for example, people forget that predated SaaS. They originally weren't a SaaS company. They made that transition to SaaS really, really seamlessly. A company like Intuit with QuickBooks made that transition to SaaS pretty easily. It became a really sustaining business model and technology for them. And so if you think about a company like Facebook, when Facebook IPO'd, you saw their share price decline by 50% because people were really worried about the transition from the internet to the mobile internet. As it turns out, they had nothing to worry about. The mobile internet was incredibly sustaining for incumbents like Google and like Facebook. And so what does AI mean? What is AI sustaining technology? Is it disruptive technology? I think it is more disruptive than sustaining, but I think for some incumbents it's going to be terrible, but I don't think it's preordained that it's going to be bad for incumbents in the way that the internet was basically bad for all incumbents. I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis, depending on your capabilities, depending on the moats that you have, depending on your mindset, etc.
I've read about sort of this terror about Facebook switching from desktop to mobile. Do you think Facebook was worried?
This guy I know really well, friend of mine who was very involved at Google on their transition to mobile. And what I do know is they were shocked at the growth in mobile revenues. It was like those numbers went from like 0 to 100 at a ridiculously fast pace. I think every incumbent right now is somewhat fearful, which I think is a really healthy thing.
If we look at like print media, for example, it was infrastructure to technology.
Yeah.
I think what's happening now is Airwallex is a technology company operating in the financial industry. They are sort of disrupting the way the infrastructure is operating and have done a very good job of this. But I feel very confident that as a technology company, we will migrate into more AI services as we go forward.
Yeah.
So what industries do you think are sort of most comfortable in the migration into this AI era, and perhaps which are the most vulnerable?
I think generally fintechs are going to be very, very resilient, in a lot of cases, huge beneficiaries of the AI boom. Because if you think about a lot of the moats that exist, and there's obviously the existing customer base, which a lot of organizations have, not just financial services have. But if you think about the data moats, if you think particularly about the regulatory and licensing moats, if you think about the fact that, AI is going to be enabling for moving money faster, more efficiently. It's going to be an enabler in terms of doing things like KYC and AML better. It's going to be an enabler in terms of things like doing customer success better, all those things, etc. I think AI, we'll see a lot of fintechs as what we will describe as AI winners in 5 or 10 years, or at the very least not AI losers. There'll be plenty of areas that will be disrupted. There are a number of different elements to those areas that are going to get disrupted the most. Firstly, the more labor intensive something is, the more it's going to be disrupted. Certainly in the short term, we're going to see knowledge workers disrupted much more than people doing physical work. Number two, where there is a large degree of not necessarily literal repetition, but a lot of overlap from task to task. So customer success is obviously an example of that. Legal work is an example of that. Accounting work is an example of that. So I think these labor-intensive industries, which have a lot of process associated with them, we're going to see a lot of disruption. So, for example, Airwallex's ability to assist the enterprise, the small company, the medium-sized company to automate a lot of its finance system is enormously enhanced, and organizations are going to benefit from that. Software engineering, an area that you're much better placed to talk about than I am, but clearly, again, we're seeing this sea change in software engineering. So the next question becomes, well, the incumbent tools providers to those companies, and are they winners or losers? And I think markets right now are very, very nervous about those companies. We've seen in the share prices. Whether the market's right or wrong, time will tell. But then the other big question is what happens in terms of the number of jobs in those areas? Again, really important question. I'm much more bullish on software engineering than most people are, because I think software engineering is an area which I think Jevon's paradox really, really applies to software engineering, where there is almost a limitless number of products. So if you compress the cost of software engineering, I think the demand for software engineering or demand for new products explodes. And even though individual software engineers might become 10 times more productive, the demand for outcomes might grow by 15 times or 20 times or 30 times. It's possible we end up with more software engineers in the short to medium and possibly the long term. The counter argument, of course, is what happens when Claude Code and other products literally do everything. And I'm like, wow, that's a level of abstraction that I'm not sure that my mind can compute. Maybe that's possible, but clearly we're some way away from that.
I think there's like a variety of different sort of industries that are going to be more suited to that type of software. I think there's a lot of technology that is facilitation of services, such as e-commerce, for example. I think in finance, for the need for precision and very clear understanding and accountability for exactly how your is operating is going to really influence what you can do.
Near enough's not good enough, is it?
That's right. Yeah. I think one of the things that is like wonderful that I'm seeing in like AI and the way we incorporate into the product is making, and I guess I'm talking about AI as a product feature, is how you can take very complex tasks and distill them down into like very easy to execute actions.
Obviously, one of the dangers with very, very dynamic technology environments is for people to kind of talk about what the technology can do today and what it can't do today and just extrapolate that. When, of course, smart founders are just solving problem after problem after problem that arises. As an incumbent organization, I'll put that word in inverted commas, there are a bunch of advantages you bring to bear. And this is true of any organization. A startup brings a bunch of advantages to bear, particularly no legacy, particularly, just can kind of think about things with a completely clean sheet of paper. But they have a lot of disadvantages. Like, for example, they have no customers on day one, or if they're operating in financial services, they may have no licenses on day one. And so I think it's Alex Rampell from Andreessen Horowitz has this great quote, which is that the battle between a disruptor and incumbent comes down to, whether the disruptor gets distribution before the incumbent gets innovation. And it's a nice heuristic. I mean, it's perhaps a little bit simplistic. There are lots of different ways now for organizations to get distribution. We saw with the case of ChatGPT, it went to 100 million users in the space of 6 weeks without spending any money. So distribution can be achieved really quickly. But incumbents can also get innovation really fast. You can partner with organizations, you can buy organizations. They've got these huge balance sheets, some of these incumbents. And so it's a little bit more nuanced than just the traditional innovation versus distribution debate. But I think the point is that in the way I think about in this AI era is there are the groups of companies that are more vulnerable. There are other groups of companies that are more advantaged. But the ultimate outcome, more than anything else, will come down to strategy, mindset, capability. And the companies that do that well will by and large, I think, be winners. And the companies that kind of bury their head in the sand will be losers. Now, if I was thinking about it, instead of thinking about it from an incumbent perspective, thinking about it from an AI native perspective, I don't think I would be trying to solve the same set of problems that traditional technology companies have provided over time. I would actually be I'd be focusing on what are the new problems that could not previously be solved by technology that can now be solved by technology. And so the reason Uber came along when it did, kind of an obvious point, Uber came along when it did because the mobile phone came along. The internet-enabled mobile phone became ubiquitous. Everyone had that technology in the pocket. I kind of needed a mobile phone in order to book an Uber and track the car and all of the things that goes with an Uber. Obvious point. But Uber wasn't possible before the internet-enabled mobile phone became ubiquitous. What are the business models that are now possible? And let's not replicate what other companies have been doing over the last 10 or 20 years. What are the new set of problems that can be solved?
Okay, so as an investor looking at a lot of early stage companies, that must be like one of the major things for you is sort of like the how AI is enabling step change in that industry. Yeah. Like, what else are you looking for in businesses that perhaps you weren't looking at 18 months ago?
There's a couple of things, and it's exactly the right question, and we spend so much time talking about and debating it. Firstly, the first question for us is we have a clear view, and it's an art, not a science, but we have a clear view of what a remarkable founder looks like. And if you look at a lot of the attributes that we focus on, Jack Zhang has most of them in spades. Like, he's kind of the archetype of that. And a bunch of Elad at ADOC is one of our founders in AI and healthcare, another example.
What are these characteristics? Is this proprietary information?
No, it's not proprietary at all. I think the judgment of whether someone has them or not is very proprietary, as in it's genuinely an art and you build that muscle, and sometimes you do it well, sometimes you do it badly, but it's not proprietary at all. So what are the things? I think first and foremost, it's an obsession with a problem. And, sometimes people say this hyperbolically, but often it's quite literal, who are doing their life's work. And so that kind of founder product fit is kind of really, really important for us. Why is this founder better placed, or at least as well placed as anyone else in the world? That's a high bar because there's 8 billion people in the world. Why is this founder incredibly well placed to solve this problem as a starting point? What's their drivers? What's their mindset? I think, and I want to come back to some of the differences today, and I think that there's subtle differences in terms of what we're looking for, but these people are incredibly curious, incredibly driven, usually have a really, really high level of energy. One thing in common with all of our great founders is they just have an insane level of energy. They're very resilient. They have that unusual combination of both having a huge self-belief. I mean, to start a company with the belief that you can kind of do something that no one's ever done before and build this huge global business. Most normal people don't think like that. So you need this huge self-belief. But you also need to combine it with kind of humility and a willingness to surround yourself with people who are incredibly smart and talented, and ability to identify world-class talent, because those two things are different. You might have a mindset to say, yeah, look, I can put my ego in check and I'm prepared to surround myself with people who are smarter than me or better than their jobs at me, but you may not be good at actually knowing what that talent looks like. So it's kind of rare for someone to be good at both of those things. So there's some of the attributes we look at. And then there's a few things that we're probably over-indexing in this AI era.
Okay, so let's come back to the delta between what they were 18 months ago and that's what they are today, or not just founders, but the businesses.
Yeah, so the founder bit, and again, just to expand on that, whether we're a founder, whether an investor knew what a great SaaS business looked like. We'd seen them for the last 20 plus years. And so we knew what the metrics were. And so execution was critically important. Execution is still critically important, but I would say strategic agility has become even more important. We're in a much more dynamic world. The fact that you're asking all these questions about what moats look like and what are the differences and how the market's going to evolve, none of us know. We're all trying to work it out. And so the people who get the big prizes are the people who kind of are super smart and work that out. So I think there's a piece around strategic agility being even more elevated than normally is. And there is a piece around what I would call, AI nativity, if you like. And so one of the things we look for is not just how smart they are and how they think about building the business, how they think about things strategically, but how they're actually going about building their business. Is it kind of like, are they best in class? We would expect them to be best in class in terms of their product development and utilizing AI tools. Are they best in class in terms of their productivity, their tools, the way they're building the business? Because if they don't have that kind of absolute immersion in the world of AI, then they're probably not going to be able to build something that their customers need. And then I think the other thing is that it's really deeply understanding problems that can be solved. And sometimes you can understand a problem really well by asking a customer. At times of these big technology shifts, there's the old Henry Ford quote, I think, of like, if I'd ask customers what they want, they'd want a faster buggy or a faster horse or whatever the answer was. And when you've got these big platform shifts, first principle thinking comes to the fore. The ability sometimes to understand more than your customers understand. When you've got these big platform shifts and you've got this huge challenge of imagination and working out what this brand new technology can do, not just what it can do today, what it might be able to do tomorrow, and being able to envisage what the technology will be able to do and what problems that can be solved in turn. You need to be incredibly creative. You need to be incredibly imaginative. And sometimes actually asking customers what they want can be exactly the wrong thing to do.
You mentioned for the founders, like agility being one of the sort of key new attributes. And I think effectively, going back decades from my understanding of technology and my career, it's like, I think we're just raising the velocity year on year, right? And so like 30 years ago, you had a lot of time to sort of like lay out your business and sort of like plan it carefully and off you go. And now you need to move with exceptional velocity to ship your product and then rapidly demonstrate distribution and then continue to out-distribute incumbents before they catch up with that innovation. And so as an investor, how do you think about your agility in the way that you watch the companies that you're actually working with? How do you sort of pivot your own mindset in terms of what's happening? It seems like you have to be paying more attention.
We
more
need
often.
to be more agile. Yeah. I mean, we sent a letter to our investors, and the point we made, we said candidly, our job, ours being any investor, not just us, but any early stage investor, our job is way, way, way harder than it ever has been. But the prize is also bigger. I mean, the size of these businesses being built is kind of unprecedented. If you think about how long Google, which was, which was at the time the fastest growing company that ever existed, how many years it took to get to $1 billion revenue. And then you think about companies today and how quickly they're getting to that scale. The size of the prize is enormous, but the complexity is really hard. This is the hard thing about being a founder right now and an investor and anyone else is you've got to be fast and you've got to be right. You've got to be pretty good to be right. You've got to be pretty good to be fast. You've got to be unbelievably exceptional to be both.
I see a lot of pressure on CFOs to be like, how are you using AI in your business? You're going to fall behind if you don't.
A lot of the failure here is a failure of imagination. Think about problems I've never been able to solve before, and can AI solve them for me? And so start with the problem I want to solve. Start with the end state of where I want the business to get to, rather than starting with a product first mindset of like, oh, ChatGPT's here. How am I going to use it?
Yeah.
And so let's remember the car. I mean, this is a bit of a tried analogy, but people talked about the Sunday drive, and kind of the Sunday drive was like, okay, I've got a car now, so I'm going to, this is largely in the post-war era in the US. Highways were being built. I've got a car. I'm going to take my car out for a drive. We don't think about that now. We think about car as a utility to help us achieve something. We don't think about how am I going to use electricity. It's kind of like electricity powers all the things. It powers these cameras. It powers these microphones, the lights, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's kind of the first point is start thinking about the problems in your business. Start being creative about what you'd love to be able to do as an organization that you can't do today, rather than saying, I've got this piece of technology, what am I going to do with it?
Do you have any concerns around safety, trust, compliance, especially, AI has elements of hallucinations or approximations. The industry is moving faster than ever. How do you think about some of those safety aspects?
Yeah, I think they're huge issues. And I think we're early in that journey. And I think, people have read it. Dario from Anthropic wrote his paper, which I think was a really important paper and highlighted some of those issues. Other people have been talking about it. With every new technology, we had to, you need to adopt guardrails, you need to adopt rules. And if I think about it more at a societal level than as an individual investor level, I think we've just got this crazy challenge as a society. One is, to be frank, if liberal democratic societies don't win the AI race, we've got a real problem in our hands, number one. And so kind of a mindset of like, let's just wait and pause and kind of just take things slowly. Frankly, I don't think we have that option. Secondly, it's kind of hard. It's hard for anyone, even the most sophisticated people in the world, to write rules and regulations. When you're kind of talking about politicians who are trying to score points, where there isn't much consensus, where they don't necessarily, because this stuff is so complex and so technical, they don't fully understand all of the issues. So we've got to you've got to find this balance between, firstly, driving change because it's going to provide so many benefits as a society, whether it's, helping cure cancer, whether it's helping solve big problems like, global warming and the like, et cetera, et cetera. So we want the technology to solve these problems. The innovation today, by and large, is being done by companies. And that is a very, very complex problem. So there is no question a world of incredibly powerful AI systems, companies are more powerful than countries. I think it's a bit of a hyperbolic claim. The people who probably really know, like at Dario and Anthropic, seem to be pretty nervous about the rate of change and the progress and the need for guardrails and a need for these intelligent systems as they get more and more intelligent to kind of act appropriately and ethically and have these guardrails in place. And, frankly, when we use terms like appropriately and ethically, your version of appropriate and my version of appropriate could be different, and who gets to make those rules and who gets to decide. I think this stuff's really complicated.
Indeed. And I think we were going to see sort of like slower velocity today, but, some really dramatic things happening in future. So as an investor, how do you think about where you invest, given how important this is to get right?
Yep. I mean, look, for us as an investor, we are mainly operating at the application layer. And so that's it's pretty analogous to the investing we've been doing the last 10 or 15 years. But by and large, we are mainly operating at the application layer because that's where we think there's a lot of value going to be created.
If you were to give one piece of advice to founders today, perhaps early stage, perhaps thinking about starting a business, what would that advice be?
Be very clear about the problem you're solving. You've got to go into stuff with a clarity of thinking around the problem you're trying to solve, why you're the right person to solve it, why it's the right time to solve that problem, what's the catalyst for why now as opposed to 5 years' time or 5 years previously, why someone hasn't solved it. I love organizations where they're solving a problem today that is relatively narrow and not trying to do everything, but have a broader vision of the problems that they're going to solve over time. And so I think it's that combination of having a vision of where the market's going to evolve to. And of course, that vision will change and will iterate, but having, at least at a point in time, having a clarity of thinking and saying, this is a view of what we're going to look like in 5 years' time. But today, we're focused on a very specific subset of the problem. I said you've got to be right and you've got to be fast, but it's kind of hard to always get it right out of the gate. And sometimes being certain is better than being right. And what I mean by that is if you spend endless cycles debating, is this the right answer? Is that the right answer? Then you're not going to learn anything. You're just going to end up debating. By doing, you learn. And if you're curious and you're thoughtful and you look at the data, you can tell if you've got your first hypothesis right, whether you've got it partly right, completely right, completely wrong, and then iterate. But like just sitting around a room, just chatting forever and ever and ever, you don't learn anything.
So strong conviction.
Mm-hmm. Loosely held.
More learnings.
Yep.
Take the data, reevaluate.
Yeah, it's a really good summary. Strong conviction, loosely held, but you got to believe in something. You got to stand for something. You got to have a proposition. And if you don't have a pretty high level of conviction in your own mind, kind of like, yeah, this is interesting, I might try it, that probably doesn't feel like a high enough level of conviction to me.
Paul, wonderful. Thank you for your time. Great to hear the investor's perspective on AI. And we'll have to do this again in a couple of years to sort of reevaluate our own understanding today.
Yeah, things are going pretty quickly. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
Fun. Appreciate it.
That's a wrap on this episode. We hope this conversation gave you practical insights, food for thought, and a clearer view of what's shaping the future of global finance. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the technology, strategy, and people shaping this new era of global finance. We'll catch you next time.